Well, welcome to our monthly constituent meeting. We like to do this once a month during the legislative session, both to provide you an update on the things that we're working on, our committees, and the work in the State House, and then really to open it up for questions or comments or just overall discussion about any issues or things that are of interest to you. So that's where we are. I started last time, so I'm going to let you start first this time.
Okay. So I'm Edye Graning, and I am the Vice Chair of the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee. And our committee has seven new members. So we spent a lot of time this session getting everybody up to speed on all of the areas that we cover. We have had one bill get out of committee, and it's in the Senate now, and that is about workforce development, and that is making very clear the role of the new Executive Director of Workforce Strategy and Development job, different from the Department of Labor's job, and how they work together and where they have separate responsibilities. We're looking at that as a way for us to support workforce in a really robust way in Vermont so that we can use all of the hopefully federal and state dollars to really train folks up well and to make sure that we're developing the workforce that Vermont needs. So we're happy about that. We are working with the Department of Financial Regulation right now to update some laws about banking and insurance. Hopefully that one will be out at the end of the week. What else are we working on? Budget. As Trevor and I were talking about, there are a lot of different groups looking for us to say we would like state dollars to be spent on these areas, and so we're reviewing all of those requests. A lot of them that come to our committee have to do with workforce and housing and things like that. And then we are also taking testimony on career technical education and how to reform the governance of that system in Vermont. And we're hoping to have that done before the 14th of March. So we're really chill and relaxed, and we have nothing going on. I'm being very sarcastic. We're working full tilt. We're working when we're not there. We're meeting with people. We're making all kinds of different, doing a lot of research to make sure that we get these things right. So it feels like a lot right now because we're 2 weeks before we have to get everything that we want to get done this year to the Senate. And so we, if it doesn't get to the Senate by the 14th of March, then for the most part, it doesn't happen this year. And so we're all of us are in that data or time crunch right now. So that's where we are.
Yeah, except money committees get an extra week.
You get an extra week.
They get an extra week.
Because we send you bills.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, plus the budget.
Yeah.
I didn't say who I was. Most of you know who I am, but I'm Trevor Squirrel, and I've been your representative now going into my 9th year. And I've served on House Environment or House Natural Resources, but I'm on Appropriations and have been. It's going into my 5th year. And on Appropriations, each of the committee members have areas that we follow for budget purposes. Mine are the criminal justice system, so think Department of Corrections, courts, state's attorneys, victim services, anything related to criminal justice. And I also have the Agency of Natural Resources and those folks, and so I also oversee all the environmental legislation and the work around that. In terms of our committee, when we first come in January, we have to do what's called a budget adjustment, which is a mid-year correction to a budget that we passed at the end of the last session. So we did that work, and then we passed it out of the House and sent it to the Senate. Senate does their work. They never leave everything the way we send it to them. It's changed in some fashion. And the Senate just passed it out today, I understand, but I don't know what all the changes are in that. And so what will happen, just from a process standpoint, we will say we want a committee of conference, which means 3 folks from the House committee side and 3 senators will get together to reconcile those differences, and then we bring it back to both bodies for the decision, and then ultimately it goes to the governor. In the meantime, the governor gave us his budget for FY26, which starts in July 1 of this year, runs through June 30th of the following year. So we're in the real midst, actually the tail end probably, of taking testimony from all of the departments and agencies that have budgets before us. We're now in the process of talking to committees of jurisdiction, policy committees, to say, what do you think of these items in the budget? Do you recommend whether we keep what the governor recommended, make changes to that, or are there additional asks that haven't been contemplated in the budget? We'll take all that information in from all the committees, from all the advocates, from all the folks that speak to us about these things. And then we can't spend more money than what the forecast we get twice a year. We get a forecast in January and a forecast in July about how much revenue is available for us to spend on the budget, and we have to stay within that number. We know what it is in January. We know that it changes from month to month, and we have a sense of what those numbers are, but we can't do anything. We can't say, well, gee, there's an extra $50 million coming into the Treasury in March, and we can use that money. We can't do that. So we still have to stay within the budget constraints we've developed in January. So that's the process we're in. We have to get our budget out of our committee by the 3rd week in March, and then that goes on the floor the following week, gets debated, discussed, amended, probably in some form, and then it goes to the Senate, and they go through their process, and then that's the last bill that gets voted out of our session sometime in May of this year. Anyway, that's my update.
So we're going to open it up to questions. You don't have to ask questions about anything that we said, but we're happy to answer those questions. Any questions you have about anything that's happening legislatively?
Is it correct that the Secretary of Education has still not been confirmed
It is
by
correct.
the legislature? Is wondering how that can continue, especially with her plans to consolidate into 5 school districts, lose our local control and community, which I think would be very detrimental to Vermont. And having had 4 kids go through Chicken East, I know how good it is. I can't imagine having more services available to drive your kid to Charlotte and spend an hour driving the kid back and forth to school each way just to get more services. It's not going to save people money, and it's not going to do the kids any good. So I certainly hope that you all can advocate for looking for savings, but not ruining a good thing that we have in our educational system.
So I think I'm going to, is that, yeah, okay.
I will defer to you since you're the board chair.
So a couple of things. Only the Senate gets to vote on whether to confirm any of the governor's commissioners or directors, what is she? Secretaries, there we go. And so advocate for your Senate to your senators if you have strong feelings about that. The House doesn't get a vote on that. The governor's plan or interim Secretary Saunders's plan, I don't either one, however you want to talk about it, is a plan. It is not, the bill language, I saw a draft of today, 176 pages, has not even been introduced yet. So it is in draft form only. The Education Committee has also started a separate bill that is their committee bill to look at something that makes a little more sense on, than 5 districts, one that is 34,000 students, the others around 10 or 11,000 students. So they're working on something that's more comprehensive and more rational. So, and then, like I said, my committee is taking the lead on how to do that with tech education and what that governance system should look like. And we had testimony on that today. We have not seen any, again, language, right, on what a bill would look like and what that governance structure in law would look like. We've only seen the sketch of what it could look like or should look like in their opinion. So I hear you.
Is that a Senate bill? Or a House bill?
House. Both are going to be House bills.
Yeah. And that's, if I may just put my opinion out there, that's a dilemma we have too as a body, because as we've been talking, we're off next week because of town meeting week. And we come back and you only have a week before crossover. So, and that's a policy bill, it's not a money bill. So there's been certainly a level of frustration on our part waiting for the administration to give us something in bill form, not just talking points and things like that, something we could actually work with. But I also know that our committee, education's been working on some things too. So it definitely, I would just echo what Edie's saying, it's a plan. It's a proposal. And we'll see where we go with that. These are discussions other than your expertise with this outside of my realm where I work, but it's certainly top of mind for everyone that's in the House or in the legislature right now. So I will say that I don't know where we'll end up with this, but money has been set aside in the general fund in the budget to buy down tax increases, but we don't really know what they're really going to look like. There's been a projection, but we don't really know what that number is going to look like. The danger in using general fund money to buy down your tax increases is that you just create a cliff next year. So it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. So.
Band-Aid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Along the same lines, what I know from the proposal from the governor is it's a lot about consolidation and big districts and things like that to save money. And I'm just curious if the education committee is looking at a different consolidation plan, or are there other places where you can actually save money and lower the cost per student for Vermont students?
Yeah, so they're looking at class size as a main, not a main, as one of the places to focus, because the state right now has class size maximums but no class size minimums, and we know that having a class of 6 is not an efficient or effective way to educate students. So we're, that's really where, and that was not part of the governor's plan at all. They didn't even, I haven't read the 176 pages, but in their plan, it wasn't part of that.
How do you control class sizes when you have tiny districts and schools?
So the question is,
I mean, if you,
right?
I mean, you
The
have
quest-
one for first grade class and your district has 6 first grade students. How do you make that
Oh,
class
multi-age
bigger?
classrooms,
Okay.
and we do that in this district here. We have 2 and 3 grade multi-age classrooms. So, and they're great for kids. They're great for teachers. They work really well in our district. And that means our average class size is 17, 18. And so it's better for taxpayers also.
Yeah. Still small though, I would guess.
It's small compared to a lot of
states.
nationwide.
Yeah.
Yep.
Other folks?
Well, I hope that I agree that the governor's proposals are kind of half-baked right now, but I hope that you will give serious consideration to consolidated school districts, and not so much about the money as much as how much better I believe we can function, how much more we can offer our children. You know, our individual districts are either unable or unwilling to really do capacity planning. It makes no sense that Winooski, Burlington, and South Burlington are all building new high schools without talking to each other. You know, MMU now has enough vacant capacity to fit all the students from Montpelier High School. You know, we really no longer need 2 middle schools. The capacity planning on a region-wide basis makes, you know, a lot of sense. Individual school districts are unwilling to really think about the future because they're kind of concerned with the next like 2 or 3 years. But what is education going to look like in 10 years, 15 years? What do we want it to look like kind of as a region? It's something that individual school districts, you know, can't take on. And integration with colleges, with mental health system, all that stuff. And individual school districts are unwilling to really have a serious human resources plan. It's like, how are we going to have the best well-trained faculty as a region who are prepared to figure out what education is going to look like in 10 or 15 years? Individual school districts are kind of unwilling to kind of do that. But regionally, I believe that more kids will, you know, tech ed is ridiculous. I mean, Burlington is building a tech ed center without seriously consulting the school districts that it serves. And I think a regional school district. Jericho once had 16 school districts, 15 of them with schools. You know, people were opposed to MMU High School because of consolidation, loss of local control. You know, the same thing with the more recent merger. I mean, the logic behind the most recent merger applies to the larger school district, and it does not mean shipping kids all over the place. It more than likely means bringing resources, having resources to be able to be more mobile, moving to where kids are, and being able to offer our children more choices on more things in more ways. MMU is getting so small. You know, in a high school, I mean, MMU used to be 7 through 12. Now it's 9 through 12. But as we shrink, it gets harder and harder to offer the full range and expanded range of things that we want to be able to offer our students. And we both need a vision for the future on how we're going to deliver education with more choices. But we also need to manage sort of the capacity of the resources that we use to educate, so that even in a smaller high school, kids can have a full range of choices. The children in Winooski should not be limited by the fact that they're going to a high school with 150 kids, when we have these larger, we ought to be able to offer them more choices. So I hope you'll give it some, and it's not ready to go. It's not, and the basic idea has been around for a long time. I mean, the push for regionalization is what resulted in MMU, and a lot of people were opposed to it, and I think we benefited tremendously from that regionalization.
So I'm going to say that a little bit differently. I think the optimum district size is something that we need to be thinking about more in the state. What is the right size of superintendent to student ratio, and how do we get economies of scale that way rather than regionalization, right? What is the right class size? What is the right school size? And we know we have mountains. We know we have difficult terrain. So how do we get as close to that as possible in our areas that are less populated? And how do we hit those numbers really, really well in the areas that are more populated? And so that all students can have that robust opportunity, right? Robust opportunity in their education and equitable experience across the state. And is it going to save a lot of money? I don't know, right? What we found in MMU is when we consolidated, we saved some money and we brought up the quality so that everyone had the same level. So we didn't save as much money as we would have had we brought the quality down to the lowest common denominator in the district. So we always want to do better for our students. We can save some money. It's not going to be a giant cost saver, but that shouldn't stop us because it's going to be better for our students. And so I think we need to just think about this a little bit differently and understand that we hit a really hard stage with our inflation increases and taxes went up a lot, and nobody wants that, and that's not sustainable. Full stop, not sustainable. And we don't have the right system to educate students in an equitable way that gives everyone great opportunities in Vermont. And so is there something we can do, and there are lots of things we can do, that move us closer on both of those things, right? A way that we can stabilize costs so that we don't have big inflections, is that the right word? In that, it shouldn't be changing a lot, and better opportunity for all students across the state. And I think, I'm optimistic, we're moving in that direction.
Can you explain what you mean? I'm not sure I understand what regionalization is compared to what you just described.
I don't, I was
What
just
I
trying
meant by
to.
regionalization is that, for example, if Winooski and Burlington and South Burlington were in the same school district, they could be planning their high schools in a way that could maximize what they're offering to kind of all of the students. You know, if you're going to have a small high, organize the program by kind of school size, or or just kind of be doing it together in order to maximize what we can offer those students. Right now, we have children or our students from Huntington spend 45 minutes on the bus to get to MMU. They spend some time hanging around waiting for a bus, and they spend an hour taking a bus to Burlington for 2 hours and 12 minutes of digital media instruction. And the reason that happens, and misses 6 out of 8 classes at MMU. And there's no reason why, if we had a more regional system, digital media could be offered like in more schools, if there was a faculty member moving around. Colchester is full, CVU is full, South Burlington is full and needs needs to build a high school. At the same time, MMU is way under capacity. Well, maybe there's a couple hundred kids from other schools who could come to MMU to sort of to balance it out. Individual schools could offer some specialty programs that could attract students from other high schools, or other schools could go to. Faculty training, faculty recruitment. I mean, right now what happens is the wealthy schools recruit principals from the poor schools. The poor schools hire the principals, they train them up, and then they gravitate to the wealthy schools. And there's this migration of talent from poorer school districts to more wealthy districts, which is, kind of, it is not good for the state. And it means that the wealthy schools don't need to really think about developing human resources and developing leadership talent, because they're just going to recruit it from the lower income schools. It's like, how do we work with, how do the secondary education system present a front to the community college system in a way, that makes it easier for the community college system to work with our juniors and seniors. Right now, they've got all these individual school systems that they have to deal with. There's so many. There's no reason why, the technical reason why our kids couldn't be taking Western civilization with kids from Philadelphia, Accra, Ghana, and New Zealand. But an individual school system is not going to be able to, to have the resources to kind of figure that out. Tech ed could be really fairly distributed across all the school systems if we were part of a district where we could be talking to each other. Burlington is as responsible for providing tech ed to MMU kids as they are to the Burlington kids, but they're building a new tech center without seriously talking to MMU, and a lot of that stuff goes away if you had one district. It means that MMU and Burlington High School would relate to each other the same way Campbell Sump and Browns River relate to each other right now. It's just, more schools in the district.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
No, well said.
Other folks? Questions, comments? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I see some value in what you're saying, and I also hope that we can continue to look at what's best for the student. Individually, we consolidated here, lost the ID school, which provided valuable services for many kids over the years. We were promised, no, we won't close the school. There's a lot of considerations, and it might be helpful if there was a statewide committee on part of Department of Education that looked at these kinds of issues in terms of expanding what we have rather than sacrificing what we have to create something new that might not even be worthwhile. That's all I have to say about that.
Did you have a question? Okay.
Other questions, comments?
I'm more on the housing front.
Go ahead.
I missed, I'm in the mortgage business and have been for 25 years, and had a prior commitment last week, and our association had their legislative day. I heard great things about Mike at the luncheon. They really enjoyed speaking with him. And a lot of my experience is just going to be what I see in the market and the industry. And it's interesting, a lot of conversation about schools, which is, and I don't envy you guys at all, trying to figure out, because this, we've been doing for years to fund schools ain't working anymore. And it's got to be something new. And hats off to you guys for trying to figure that out. It's beyond me. But one of the things here we're seeing, and COVID was a big part of it, since 2020, I've worked with more out-of-staters coming in here than I ever have.
Could you speak just a little bit louder?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm in the mortgage industry, so a lot of it's just housing for me. Not just housing, but since 2020, I've worked with more out-of-staters coming to Vermont than ever. And you hear my neighbors, people say, oh, it's the guys from California buying the big second homes. I'll tell you, it's not the people I'm working with. Those are families coming. They're young professionals with kids that want what we have. Those are the kind of people we want here. And it's interesting granted, they got kids and they're working and all that stuff. And I'm appreciating this meeting because I feel like one of the younger guys here. So it's, thank you for that. But at some point, I heard Trevor, you were talking with one of the gentlemen about possible Act 250 stuff, but developing some kind of plan, and I'm sure your committee's going to get into that at some point, where, even though we're out of the stupid COVID years, for desirable properties, particularly in Chittenden and Franklin County, my buyers are still often going into multi-offer situations. Multiple offers on a home, at list or over list when they buy it. And that's all just supply and demand. And as we have trying to get an influx of younger, because we're an aging state, and trying to get young people here to come and work at companies like Graning, which is awesome for the economy of Chittenden County. We're going to need housing for them, and trying to figure out where that housing is coming from. And granted, I'm a little bit of the problem because I'm in the business. I refinanced during COVID. Got that low rate. I don't want to move, right? That's kind of the lock-in factor. But and I don't think we're ever going to build our way out of it. We can't build them fast enough here in Vermont with the demand that's coming. And from some of the demographics I've seen, they're saying the largest block of first-time home buyers are coming to market in the next 5 years, whatever that generation is. And I saw a stat yesterday, the median age of a first-time home buyer rate last year was 38 years old. Been in the workforce 18 years, buying their first home. median age of a home buyer was 56. Home buyers are becoming older.
So are you asking what we're doing about it, or?
Yeah,
Yeah, so,
I know there's gonna be a lot of stuff floating around and,
yep, so we're looking at supporting more housing. We're looking at what we're finding is that it's too expensive to build a house that anyone can afford right now.
yeah,
It costs, in $550 to build a house that somebody who has $350, who can be approved for a mortgage at about $350, right?
Right.
So there's a big gap there. And one of the things we're looking at is how do we support infrastructure? So community septic or water connections or other roads or other things like that in areas that we said last year are in the Act 250 designated, areas 1A and
Right.
1B, right, which
Yeah.
are they're being set in the next year or so. So how do we do that? So there are 3 or 4 different proposals that are going to be going through this year. I don't know which ones will make it to the finish line on how do we make it easier to build in the places where we want building to happen, where we've already said as a state we want building to happen. And how do we make it more affordable to the buyer, and make it so that the builders aren't on the hook for every single thing, and that towns have the resources that they need to build that infrastructure or to support that infrastructure getting built. So that's a really general answer. I can be a lot more specific, but I don't want to, that's.
oh, that's fine, it's just,
But it's been a discussion for weeks now, and I think it's going to start in the Senate. We thought we were going to have it in our committee, and then we were asked to do 2 other things instead.
okay.
So, yeah.
It's challenging for sure.
Yeah,
Last year alone, last couple of years, made some changes to Act 250 and some of the designations, and that speaks to some of the tier issues and things like that. But we are hearing from private developers that they're building projects now or expanding projects because of the changes that have been made. How much more we're going to do on that front, I'm not sure. I think one of the issues that's still outstanding, at least in that Act 250 space, is appeals process. I think there's a lot of projects that can get shut down quite easily by just an individual, and I'll just leave it there. But yeah. And the other thing I'd like to say is that we've put hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 3 or 4 years into housing, particularly for affordable housing, right? So we need the private developers doing their thing. And for profit and all the work that they do. But we're also putting a lot of money into the housing associations, organizations to build moderate housing or low-income housing, right? And to Edie's point, subsidizing those differences in cost, so that folks can afford and get a mortgage to do that, right? Even though and then that carries through if people decide to sell going forward, and they're having success with that. But it's tough to try to crack a nut that people are estimated at 30,000 units, right? So it's huge. Anyway, recognize the challenge, trying to find all the ways that we can to fund all the different stakeholders that are involved with that, and make sure that, from a regulatory standpoint, that we keep the regulations that are important to us, right? That do the right things, but also, some of these things were put in place 30 years ago. Is it time for a relook, which we've done.
right. Yeah. Right. I think between housing and education, you guys have a full plate down there.
Patty?
This is not a well-informed question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I am curious, I am assuming that towns are going to have to play a role here in terms of upgrading infrastructure to accommodate additional housing units, like water treatment and sewage and that kind of stuff. So have the towns in the areas of the state that you would like to see the building happen stepped up and said that they're interested in doing the work that it's going to take and having that go on in those localities?
There's been grant money made available to towns, small rural towns, to do that infrastructure work. The thing that I've seen recently, which is somewhat disturbing, is that because the process takes a while to sort of get people on board and do the planning and the design and what have you, that it only takes, again, a few people to sort of rise up and say, we really don't want to do that here.
Right.
And I think there are a couple towns now of that list of 10 or 15 that got grants that are turning the money back in because they're losing public support for it. And it's disturbing to read the comments that come out of those conversations, quite frankly. I'm not sure if it was a Digger article this week or something like that, but that I read something this past week
I
about.
can't remember what town, I did too, and I can't remember what town they were talking about.
They were
But it was-
concerned about folks with vouchers coming into town and taking up housing. I'll put it
And
out there.
what I had heard was that they, you know, it's the classic argument, I love my town, I don't want it to change, I don't want a lot of,
Right.
I don't want a lot more people, I don't, you know, if we put all this in, we're gonna have a lot of more people coming in, and I really am not a fan of that. So that's why I'm asking, it's great to do the work and enable it, but if the localities aren't gonna, because I mean, it's not, I mean, they got a lot of work to do in order to, you know, get the money and do the work and all that. So I mean, it's,
Well, Westford turned their money back in last year because they got defeated on their bond vote to do that.
For 10%.
So before we go, so the law we passed last year, Act 181, allows towns to have either an Area 1A or 1B, which is an Act 250 issue where they don't have to follow Act 250 for a number of years in those areas because the town has decided and has certain regulation around it that they want to have dense housing built there. So every town gets to choose where they want that to happen based on how the, you know, if they have zoning, if they have water, if they have sewer, you know, if they have soils that can accommodate community septic, right? Like there are different things that the town has to have in order to designate the area as a 1B. 1A is different, but so once a town does that, then that could become the area where it gets built up. So the town has to both opt in, right, first, and then do, so it's a process. And so I think that there are a lot of towns that want to opt in and want to have these areas. And yes, it's hard for some towns to actually do that because it's hard. But we're trying to set up the systems for the towns that are ready and can, so that they can build housing in areas that make sense for those towns, for the environment, for Vermont, right? So it's all of those things. So
there are at least some towns that are anxious to move ahead. So that's great. I'm glad to hear that.
I mean, that is a profound question. And I mean, my main experience is with Jericho, where basically looking at wastewater has been a performative exercise for 50 years, where Jericho has justified exclusionary zoning based on the idea that it's going to add wastewater and allow for village center construction. Jericho's just spent almost 3.5 years on its 4th feasibility study for Riverside. Has not discussed it with Underhill yet. You know, you know, the odds of Jericho building it are very low. I mean, basically Jericho has got what it's wanted. It's got permission from the state to restrict housing, reserve housing for the wealthy in most of town, with the idea of containing middle and low income people in a small area, but then never making that possible. And I think my suggestion is that somehow you need both a carrot and a stick. I mean, these are towns that have turned down 90% money and the odds are Jericho is going to ultimately, I don't know whether Jericho is going to accept the 90% money. But if a town, and I think you need a stick, and I think that stick needs to be that the state will fund the wastewater system for a developer putting in so many houses or so many units that there's no, in Jericho, we have a developer who wants to put in exactly what we want, but we simply can't get off the dime in making that possible, and haven't for 50 years. And I think that that someone who's prepared to build 50 or 60 units of housing, and in a town that refuses to really move ahead with wastewater at any sort of speed, should have the same public support that would be given to a municipality or a form district to build a wastewater system. It can be, a modular system. When the town eventually gets its act together, it can add on. But what's happening now is that absent the wastewater, more and more lots in the village center are being taken up by single-family homes. I mean, in Riverside right now, there are single-family lots that are intended for single-family homes for sale right where we want the dense housing. And more of that land is being taken up while we kind of sit on our hands. So why not work with a developer who's going to put in, a bunch of housing where we want it, and help them with the wastewater, because
We're
Okay.
working on it.
what's happening in Montgomery is going to happen in Jericho and Riverside.
We're working on it.
So what kind of sticks are you considering? How are you going to force towns to do this, or make it possible for developers to build the housing that we need?
Yep. Yeah, like I said, the bills are starting in the Senate, so we won't see them for a number of weeks. And then we'll have the opportunity to modify them if necessary and, keep moving forward on it. But it is very clear that this is a priority, and we have a deficit housing. We have not had enough housing being built, and it has to change, and it is starting to change. It takes time, and we are continuing to.
So
To
90%
fund
funding
it.
will not do it. It's got to be, it
It's-
will not, 90% funding is not what it takes to get Jericho to move forward.
What does it take?
Pardon?
I was just saying, what does it take? I mean, what?
I believe if the state were to, if the state were to provide the funding to a developer to build their own wastewater system, then we would get what we need, or at least some of what we need. And if it was a modular design, when the town eventually got its act together, it could add more modules to serve the general public. But if you've got someone in a Hinesburg, wherever, in a town, I mean, all the towns around us have wastewater, and Jericho has just a long history of opposing housing, and we're not going to build a wastewater system for the purpose of adding housing, in my view. That's been the plan for 50 years. But I think state aid to a developer would be an example of, that would be, maybe that would move Jericho along. You're about to lose your
That's-
biggest customer.
Yeah, it's one of the proposals that's on the table.
Good.
So we'll see what comes out of the Senate.
Other questions, comments?
You're an easy bunch tonight.
We can be done early, I'm okay with that.
I want to thank you guys for all that you're
Yeah.
doing. It's a very tough situation, and is there anything that we can do to facilitate your work and make this all work better?
I think just, share your thoughts. I don't always respond to all the emails I get, but I always read them all. So I always feel like you can shoot something to me.
Are you going to be getting a report on the sports gambling at some point?
On sports gambling.
I mean, it's really horrible.
Yeah, I don't know what the report structure is. A lot of things we do that are fairly new generate reports because it's usually part of legislation, but I don't know where,
I think one came
what the
out.
timing is.
Well, one came out was a bunch of happy talk saying that Vermont gamblers were winning, so that the return was a little low, which
Well, that's an accurate statement.
right, and I can explain how, you know, the AI that they're using and how that happens and why it's to their benefit. But you know, the 60% of men on college campuses are gambling, sports betting right now. And I guess, is that something you hope to achieve here? Would that be a good thing? Would you be happy if it was 70%? I mean, are you, you know, what are the, you know, the way they're using AI to target people and target people with addictions is just unconscionable nationally, and I don't know what the result here is, and I don't know whether you're hoping to achieve a 60% gambling rate with the men in our college campuses, or what your, you know, what your hopes are. But I think it would be good to get a report on.
I don't have any hopes at all around gambling. We've had folks come in, liquor and lottery, and they've reported in our committee with appropriations. They tell us what it is. I have my own personal opinion about gambling and whether that should be occurring or not. I certainly wouldn't want to go in a direction that you're proposing, that somehow you think we should go there.
Well, you are. There's no restrictions on advertising.
There are. There's no advertising allowed on the college
Yeah.
campuses. There are
There's-
restrictions on that.
Local, local. You could be walling off. You could be walling off more.
Other comments?
You
Questions?
coming to town meeting?
Town meeting?
We'll be in Underhill.
We'll be there.
Good.
We wouldn't miss it for the world.
Stop by and get some coffee from the Historical Society table.
We'll be there early this year because we don't have to go to Jericho.
Yeah, we'll be early.
That's right, gosh.
So we'll be there earlier.
There'll be coffee there.
Okay.
Free coffee for the reps, I guess.
You buy them all.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you for everyone that, for being here. What I really like about these get-togethers is that, yeah, we have a few folks that we see from time to time, the same folks, and I appreciate that. But it seems like every time we have a handful of new folks that we don't generally see, and that's great. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, invite your
Appreciate you being
friends, invite your neighbors, tell folks that you're coming and bring them with you or bring their questions. I think that's, you know, that's really what you can do, is let folks know that we're available. We're here available to chat, you know, less during session, but we do make time.
Yeah, and if you make it to the State House, let us know.
Yep.
Always glad to have a chat or talk.
Is there a good way to track some of these bills, like,
Yeah.
keep a closer track on what's going on? I sometimes find it a little hard to navigate the state legislative website and that
If
sort of
you-
thing.
Our expert over here is happy to give you a tutorial on how to track bills.
Oh.
Does the legislative council?
There's a number of ways to do
There are
that,
ways.
but you go to the legislative webpage and you could track things by keywords, or if you know the bill numbers, you can put them in there. If you happen to know what committee it went to, but somehow you can't figure out those things, you can go committee page. All the committee pages show what bills come into their committee or out of their committee. So there are a couple different ways to find those things. But also, at the same time, if you just want to reach out to either one of us, we'll help you navigate that.
Well, that
too.
sounds like the way to do it.
Yeah, if there's something specific, let me know today and I'm happy to help you figure it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're up to about 500 bills or so, 600 bills maybe.
We're at 350 in the House. I don't know what we are in the
Yeah,
Senate.
they're probably 100 and something over there, so.
Does it feel safe in the State House these days?
I feel safe, but we have at least one incident this year, but it was around an employee, not around a legislator.
Okay.
And we have a screening, you know, like an airport screener, kind of, one of the old airport screeners, now in one of our lobbies. So in that particular case that day, they shut everything down and everyone had to come through that.
Like a metal detector?
Yeah, metal detector.
Really? So did you guys put that in this year? I haven't been up there since last year.
Yeah.
Well, they
I
only
think it
put
was
it,
in
they
the
only,
VA.
they only made it work, well, turned it on, if you will, because there was a problem. It only happened one time, right? But that's what they did, they shut it down and made everyone go through there. It's interesting, anytime the governor's there to do a budget address or in order to address, then there's a heavy police presence. But they don't use the metal detectors for us, they just check bags and things like that, you know, so. We're a very open state house.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that's great.
And I hope it stays that way. I hope that I know there are folks that don't feel as comfortable there. I feel comfortable there. I feel safe. We have great Capitol Police, we have great staff, folks like that, that really pay attention to what's going on. So. Anyway, thank
Hope
you.
it stays that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
I've been in several state houses. I've never seen
Yeah,
anything
do I
like
get
Thank
up
you.
out of this?
Thank you.
Scout?